We are talking about the fairy tale retelling of Goose Girl, A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher because she owns me. Let's talk about it. Okay, so T. Kingfisher, can we just talk about her together for a moment? I discovered T. Kingfisher a couple of months ago, like maybe 6 months ago or so, with Paladin's Grace. Paladin's Grace was the first adult romance novel, and I'm not talking about adult content, adult romance novel. I'm talking about like a romance between two adult individuals that was set in a fantasy world that was so good that I was giggling and I was like laughing, and there were a little teariness happening, and it was such a well-written story with main character protagonists that were so relatable to me as a woman nearing my 40th year. And I fell in love, just fell in love with these individuals. So when this new book came out, A Sorceress Comes to Call, I was immediately there at my library and I was like, hey, you say you have it. Can I please have the book? And they're like, it's unavailable, but it's here. We just have to skin it. And when I say skin it, it's like put on the library bindings. So they had to put on the library bindings on the book. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, it doesn't take that long. So no worries, no worries, all whatever. It only came out on like the 8th, and it was way past the 8th at that point. And then I finally got fed up on like the like 19th or something like that. And I was like, you have still not given me this damn book. I need the book. And so I went in and I was like, can I please? I just really would like it now. And the nice lady skinned the book for me and put on the library binding so I could take it home. And then I read it, and I don't understand how T. Kingfisher does it. She manages to take incredibly complex ideas in terms of character building, storytelling, world building, and just put them in single paragraphs or single sentences that it's like, how are you doing this? She is such a good writer who has honed her craft over years and years and many books to a point where it is nigh on perfection, in my opinion. Now, you may not like the writing style, you may not like the stories she's telling, but the writing itself is so succinct and so well done. It doesn't waste a single word, and I love it so much. Love it so much. So, we're going to talk about the book A Sorceress Comes to Call, which is a retelling of Goose Girl, which, if you don't know the Goose Girl fairy tale, very, very simple rundown. Princess is betrothed and sent away to a kingdom to marry the king on the ride there. Her handmaid decides that she doesn't want to be a handmaid anymore and she wants to be the princess. So over the travels, she slowly essentially takes over the role as princess, and the princess becomes the handmaid. Once they get to the kingdom, she says, oh, I'm the princess. This is just my handmaid. Please go give her something to do. And so she is sent off to take care of the geese. And the princess lives the life of a princess who is betrothed to the king. Well, eventually the king figures it out, and he asks the princess, the faux princess, well, what would you do if you had a servant that was, being disrespectful and uppity and all that jazz? And she says, well, I would have the servant taken out into town and strung up to horses and impaled with things, so that when she was ridden away, like when the horses took off with her tied to them, that through a town she would end up dying. And so the king says, well, all right, that is the prescription and that's what's going to happen. So you are going to go do that. And of course she ends up dying, and the true princess gets her wish of, a life that she had always wanted, whatever. There's a lot of different versions of this story. There's some versions of the story where the horse Falada or Falada, depending on how you want to pronounce it, is in every rendition of the story, and that's the horse that takes them from their home to the new kingdom. And in some, he's a good horse, and some he's a bad horse, and some he's like a weird demon creature. Anyway, there's a lot of different versions of this story, but that's the basic rundown. So in this retelling of the story, I feel like the Goose Girl is actually encompassed in two different characters. Now, the story is told from two different points of view. We have Cordelia and Hester. Cordelia is the daughter of the sorceress named in the title. Her name is Evangeline, and she is a very wicked individual. Now, this book did not come with trigger warnings. It does not come with trigger warnings, which I actually think is a good thing because I think trigger warnings have gotten out of control in terms of listing off all the possible things that someone could ever be, upset with, because they're not really trigger warnings for some of them. It's like there's swearing, there's sexual content, there's, bugs being bitten, whatever. That was a weird one, but you know what I mean? Like, the trigger warnings have gotten a little out of control. So this book doesn't have trigger warnings, which I think is completely appropriate. However, I do feel like there needed to be some type of a warning just because of the sensitive nature of the book. Now, the sorceress, Evangeline, and her daughter Cordelia have an incredibly abusive relationship. The mother is unbelievably abusive to her daughter. We are introduced to the characters in the first line where Evangeline has put Cordelia under a spell called obedience, which forces her to be obedient. And the way that she does it is Evangeline essentially takes control of Cordelia's body as if it was a puppet. And so she can force her to do what she wants her to do, say what she wants her to say. In this first scene in the book, she's being forced to sit at church without moving at all because Evangeline thought that she was moving too much. So she is being forced to sit in this place, and she talks about it like it's happened many, many, many times. And she talks about the physical discomfort that becomes hurt, that eventually becomes numb, and how, that's not the worst part. The worst part is just being stuck in my own head and not being able to do anything and saying things I don't want to say. And she goes into pretty in depth of what's happening when she's put under obedience, and it's horrific, legitimately horrific. And there's a lot of one-liners that give you the idea of different things that are going on. So it's like, I wish there had been some kind of warning at the very beginning of the book. It wouldn't have stopped me from reading it, but I know some people who have had really intense abuse as children, this could have been a problem. But it's introduced in the first chapter, so it's not like it's slipped in there in a sneaky way so you don't realize what's going on until later. No, this is straight up first chapter, first line. If you know that that's what this book has in it and you don't want to read it, then don't read it. That kind of a thing. But my nurturing, protective mommy heart struggled through this book. I loved this book. I thought it was absolutely beautifully well written. The story crafting was phenomenal with the themes of good and evil and right and wrong and standing up for yourself and finding the strength to have your own voice and to take action in your own life. I really loved that. I love that aspect of this story. T. Kingfisher does such a good job of pulling me in. So my incredibly protective heart was so mad through 2/3 of this book because I wanted to reach into the pages of the book and just throttle the mother because she was so evil and she did so many horrible things. But this story was about finding strength in yourself. So Cordelia and Evangeline at the opening of the book, they live a fairly impoverished life, and Evangeline has a benefactor, so she's someone's mistress, and that's how they're surviving day to day. Well, something happens with that benefactor, and they have to leave town. So they leave town, and she concocts this idea that she is going to catch the eye of a noble. Oh, I have getting text messages. Okay, I'm going to mute my computer. So, she has this idea that she's going to catch the eye of a noble, but not too high because she doesn't want her magic to be discovered, but high enough that the prospects for Cordelia, her daughter, to marry an incredibly wealthy man is very high. so that they will have money. So the whole scheme is so that Cordelia gets married. She's only 14 and a half years old. And Cordelia's mother Evangeline is pretending she's 17 so she's at marrying age and she can get married so that they can have money. Like that's the whole thing, is she's wanting to pimp out her daughter essentially for money. And they leave town. They go to a new town, and Evangeline finds a man, and they move in with him via a very strange set of circumstances that make it appropriate. And that brings in the second point of view that we have, which is Hester. And Hester is the sister, the older sister who is unwed, kind of like the matron of the home. And so we're introduced to her. She is an incredibly interesting character. I really, really like her. So she's in her 50s-ish, and she had a chance at love, but she values her independence so much that she refused it. And she's like still in love with that man, and he's still in love with her. So we have this really interesting dynamic right there. And we're introduced to that from the very beginning of Hester's like introduction, is this idea that she is such an independent woman. She is very much interested in her own freedoms and being able to do the things that she needs to do in her own life, so she's not being tied down by someone else, or that she's having things taken away because she is doing things a little different. So we're introduced to Hester, and I love the way that they introduce this, though, is because Hester, hi, puppers, hi. She's a very snarky character. She's in her mid-years. She's like maybe 50, and she's incredibly snarky, and I absolutely love hearing her thoughts. She doesn't ever call Evangeline her name. She calls her Doom with a capital D. And I love the way that she interacts with the world. It's so funny, and it's so like exactly what you would think of an older woman at a time period where women were not given a lot of freedoms, like what she would be like. And I loved her so much. She was so wonderful to be in her head through half of the story. So the whole concoction of the plan that Evangeline is going to marry the squire, and then they're going to have this wonderful life because then they're going to marry off the daughter. So Hester can feel that this is wrong, that there's something wrong with Evangeline. She can't figure out what it is. So she invites a bunch of people over to their house so that they can have like a house party, like a just trying to create distance between Doom, Evangeline, and her brother, the squire. Now, he's called the squire by every character through the entire story, and it is not said his name, I think, more than a handful of times. So I think his name is Stephen. But in my head, he's the squire. So, yeah. So she's trying to create this distance, Hester is, between Evangeline and her brother Stephen. Well, Cordelia comes with her, and this is where like the bulk of the story really starts to pick up, is that Hester meets Cordelia, and Cordelia's mind is opened up and her world is opened up outside of her mother, because up to that point her mother had been her entire life. And she starts to see that things are different, and she knows that she's in a bad situation, and she has a handmaid for the very first time who is talking to her and saying like, I will run interference for you. I can see what happens when she's here. This is the mother. This is really, really bad. And it creates this situation where Cordelia is able to stand up for herself for probably the first time in her entire life. And it is so breathtakingly dramatic and beautiful and heartbreaking, this story of this young woman who finds family, who finds people who are able to help her and stop this evil that she never felt like she could. The end of the story is very, very good in the way that they bring everything in. Now it's T. Kingfisher, so there's definitely fantasy elements. There's a couple of other themes in the book that I think are really interesting. There's a character named Penelope Green who is very flamboyant, very big personality. She kind of takes over a room when she walks in. Your eyes go right to her as soon as you're like in her presence. And it's even brought up at some point in the book that Evangeline thinks she might be a sorceress as well, because she is not a traditionally beautiful woman, but she has a tendency to like really just everybody gravitates towards her. And she apparently always has some type of love interest in her life. But her character is very interesting. She goes on an entire like not a diatribe, but she goes on she has a little bit of a soapbox when she talks about style and feminine whims and whatnot, that I thought was a very interesting take on feminism, in the idea that like they're talking about clothing, and the style that Penelope chooses to wear all the time is a very classic style that doesn't ever change. Like she doesn't ever change her style to fit what's in fashion at the season. She knows what looks good on her. She knows what she likes, and so she's going to stick with it. She's not going to fold to the whims of the cultural idea of what's fashionable at the time. And I really liked that. And that really struck me. I mean, not because it was about clothing, but because the idea that when you find something that is you, that makes you feel settled, when you discover a piece of yourself, or you discover a hobby or a love of something that just grounds you and makes you feel like you are in a good, steady place, don't change that just because the fashion might have changed of society. And, you know, culturally, we have things that come in and out of fashion. We have things that are popular, things that are not. And I feel like we have a tendency as people to bend to the whims of our society way too easily. So I really liked Penelope. And it was interesting coming from her as well, because she was a fairly lazy individual. And that character has a little bit of character growth as well, through the story, realizing that she had kind of lived a life of the easiest possible way that she ever could, and she didn't want to live that way anymore. And so she has a really interesting character arc that I would suggest you read this book for as well, besides Cordelia's and Hester's. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling at this point. This book has some incredible themes. It has some absolutely stunning writing. I did want to give you a couple of examples of how T. Kingfisher just exudes information. Exudes? Imparts. That's a better word. Imparts information while writing in a very short period of time that for most writers would take a lot. So in the first 8 pages of the book, we're like brand new in this story, in this world, and we get a just dump of emotional information that is so well done, because it shows that Cordelia wasn't alone in her life at the beginning, but she felt very alone because she felt like she couldn't talk to people. So she has this friend Ellen, who's kind of like a secret friend that she doesn't think her mother knows about, and they go out on these horse rides together. So she's talking to Ellen. Cordelia is talking to Ellen about her life a little bit. Like, she doesn't talk a lot, but she asks questions, and through those questions, it's very telling what her life is like. What they're talking about right now is closed doors in their home. She's not allowed to have a closed door because her mother says that that creates secrets, and there are no secrets in this house. So Cordelia asks this question: does your family think you're keeping secrets when you do? Speaking about the closing doors. The silence went on long enough that Cordelia looked up and realized that Ellen was giving her a very penetrating look. She had a pink, pleasant face and a kind manner, and it was unsettling to suddenly remember that kind did not mean stupid, and Ellen had been talking to her for a long time. "Oh, Cordelia," said Ellen finally. She reached out to touch Cordelia's arm, but Falada, sidled at that moment, and Penny took a step to give him room. Penny's the other pony. So they did not touch after all. "Sorry," said Cordelia gruffly. She wanted to say, "Please don't think I'm strange. That was a strange question, I can tell. Please don't stop talking to me." But she knew that that would make it even worse. so she didn't. It's all right, said Ellen. And then, it will be all right, which Cordelia knew wasn't the same thing at all. This writing it like, oh my gosh, I don't know how she does it. She writes these sentences that have so much emotional power packed into them. I'm jealous. I'm so jealous of this because I can't write this way. That feeling at the end of that sentence, that very last sentence, is like everything you need to know about who Cordelia is and what she's dealing with. Because it's all right and it's going to be all right are two very, very different things. And Cordelia understands that. She understands that there is a difference of right now it's okay versus later it will be okay. And at the beginning of the book, she doesn't believe that later it will be okay. And it's that journey that Cordelia goes on with Hester, with the other characters that are introduced in the story who are fairly noble characters. It makes my heart so happy by the end. I'm so sad at the beginning. I'm so sad. And I was so angry and I wanted to rip Evangeline's face off through a lot of the book. No, through all of the book. All of her interactions, I wanted to rip her face off. YouTube, don't get at me about that. But by the end, Cordelia has found a peace and a happiness, and she's found a way to be okay and to have everything be all right. She's so good. T. Kingfisher is so good. Okay. Oh my gosh, this video is already way too long. Okay, I just saw the time. Okay, a couple of other things that I wanted to point out is just T. Kingfisher is so good at comedy. So this is Cordelia. This is chapter 33. So this is near the end of the book, and she's sneaking out, and this is hilarious. So the floorboards creaked as she moved. She winced, trying to avoid the squeakiest bits. But every time she stepped aside, it seemed to wake an even louder squeak. Was it this bad during the day? It must be. It's not as if someone comes in and tunes the floors at night. I just don't notice it when I'm not trying to be stealthy, which that was hilarious. Tunes the floor at night like a piano, like someone comes in and tunes a piano. They're tuning the floors. Like, I just thought that was really funny. And because we've all been in that position where it is nighttime and we are trying to be quiet and we somehow manage to be louder than we normally would be. It's like, oh my gosh. Okay, and then she's met by her handservant, her handmaid, and she asks her, "Are you running away?" And Cordelia says, "What? No." And then Alice responds, if you're going to meet a man, if you'll forgive me saying so, you should probably look a lot happier about it. That was one of the sentences that made me laugh out loud. And there were so many throughout the entire book. Like, I love it. And there was one idea. There's so many different complex ideas that Kingfisher puts in these stories that are just kind of like throwaway lines, but are very, very deep. And so this is just an example, and we're going to end with this one. So Cordelia says, "You all believed my mother was a lady," said Cordelia. "There was no proof of any of it. You just believed it, and you introduced her to other people that way, and that made it true. It's all the same." So this idea that we believe things because someone said that they were true is very interesting. I think you could write an entire book. There probably are many books written with that idea that just because a certain individual said that you are this way or that something is this way, a lot of us just accept it. And how many things in our lives are we just accepting because people have just said, well, it's just this way? And I feel like Cordelia is an interesting character because she's so beaten down that she does accept everything her mother says as that is just the way that it is, but she finds her backbone to realize that exact thing is that just because other people say it's true doesn't necessarily mean it is. So I'm going to leave that with you. Go read A Sorcerer Comes to Call. It's worth the money to buy the book. I'm probably going to end up buying it to put it on my shelves to go with all of my other Paladin books by T. Kingfisher. She's so incredible. Such a good author. Stop doing this to me, T. Kingfisher, because I am... Your books rip my heart out in a good way. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us today. If you found value in our video, whose hour? I'm the only one that does this. That was weird. If you found any value in the video today, please like and subscribe. It does help my channel. And as always, remember, you are worthy, you are loved, and happy reading.